Your family came here before the late 70s. Were Jews locked in jails then?
Of course. Of course they were locked in jails. I could tell you a few stories. When we lived in Russia, the fear was of the knock on the door. My grandfather was in fear for his life every day because he tried to make a little extra income on the side. He was a watch repairman, and so in order, yes, and a very good one, but it was never enough money to survive on the salary of what the government gave out. So he tried to repair watches at night, and so he would have parts.
He was a night watchman.
There you go. Literally. And so his best customers were actually police because they needed their watches and they needed them repaired. And they needed them to work. So he had all kinds of watch parts, And so at night he'd be sitting at the table working. And when there was a knock on the door, he never knew if it was somebody, a customer, or somebody coming to arrest him. And whenever we were at the home and we would hear that knock, my grandmother went into a panic, hiding all his tools and all his parts and all of that, and they would scramble until they answered the door to see who was on the other side. So the fear was always of that knock on the door, yes.
Why would the Russian authorities or the police or anybody, why would they have the threat of a knock on the door?
Because the knock on the door meant that it could be someone who is coming to arrest you because making extra money on the side was illegal. Everything was owned by the government. You weren't allowed to make money on the side. There's no capitalism. It was communism, owned by the government. Okay.
So, but they call it a Union of Soviet Socialist Republic.
That's a myth. There's no such thing. It's communism. Everything is owned by the government. Everything is doled out by the government. Your income, your housing, the ability to purchase food, whatever was produced, whatever wasn't produced. There were always shortages. My grandmother always stood in line for simple things like flour. If there was bread to be sold on the street, the line formed for miles, and there was always shortages. They would run out before any customers were satisfied. So it was a miserable life, absolutely miserable. People don't understand what communism or socialism is. It's not what they imagine it to be.
So socialism is sold on the basis of fairness, and so that the lower classes will say, well, we'll be as well off as the rich.
No such thing, because you know what? In order to get the medical care that you thought you were going to get under communism, socialism, you had to bribe somebody to get it. So even though supposedly the health care was free, if you weren't able to pay somebody under the table, literally illegally, to get the care, you didn't get it, because there were only so many hours in the day for the doctor. And so there was, the black market thrived, okay? It's never what it's supposed to be. And it's always the lowest common denominator. So you're taking from the rich to supposedly raise up the poor, but what you're making is everybody poor, because there is no incentive to do anything except be illegal. So the ones who had some incentive, the ones of any occupation like a doctor or well, that's pretty much it, or even a storekeeper. What he would do is, if something came in, he would put things on the side, and people would come in and pay him extra for whatever was available to buy. So if he wasn't scared of being arrested, or if he took the chance of being arrested, he would make a little extra money on the side. So human nature is human nature. People will, that they'll try to survive no matter what.
What about this idea of freedom of thought and freedom of expression under a socialist regime?
There's no such thing as freedom of expression or freedom of thought. The one thing that you're always worried about is if you spoke with anyone and had an opinion that wasn't that which was promoted by the government, you were always afraid that someone would turn you in.
What kind of person?
Any person. It could be your friend. It could be anyone, because they would give incentive for if the government suspected anything, they would turn people against each other. And so you never knew if you could talk to anyone, because they had incentive of extra something, of being not charged themselves with some made-up crime, or some extra money or whatever, and you were always afraid that somebody would turn you in, or snitch, and you were in trouble. And it was the thought wasn't that you had to prove you guilty; you had to prove yourself innocent, and that was kind of hard. So there's no such thing as free thought. The radio was blasting every day of how wonderful the government was, what they were producing, how wonderful the country was doing, how horrible America was. The capitalistic America is always looking for war, and that's why we the people must make sure that we have the ammunition to fight back the capitalist America. My mother always lived under the threat that America was going to attack Russia, which is the dumbest thing in the world because it was never true, but that's what they were taught.
And is that what people believed?
You know what? They had no choice. Whether they believed or not, they had to live the life according to what they were told because, what difference does it make whether they believed or not? I mean, there was such control over everything. It's not like you had a choice of going or doing, or saying it. It was what it was. It was.
But if someone were to say that America were benign or America was not a threat, for instance, could they get turned into the authorities for that?
All right, let me tell you a quick story. So when Russia took over Poland before World War II. Russia divided Poland with Germany. They took sections. Okay, so when Russia came into that part of Poland that was theirs, it happened to be where my father was living. A gentleman was sitting in a restaurant, and he said, "Wow, look! While we were under Poland, we had everything. They had produce. They had, everything was available in the stores. But as soon as the Russians came in, they cleared everything out. Literally, there was nothing on the shelves." So he made a comment to that effect. Immediately, he was arrested on the spot. He was convicted. He's set in jail for 30 years. Okay? It's not a joke. Okay? This was just one comment. You weren't allowed to think. And they had just taken over. It wasn't like Poland was not communist before Russia took over that part of Poland.
Right. And what was the charge that he was?
He was against the country. He was against the people. Everything was for the people, quote unquote. Okay? It was never for the people. The people had nothing, but the people in charge had everything. Okay.
But the American Democratic Party wouldn't bring in a system like that, would they?
They wouldn't know what they're bringing in because they really don't know how evil it is. They don't understand. And to tell you the truth, when we came here, we're new immigrants. We didn't understand, literally, not to be critical, but how naive Americans are because we're free here. We don't understand how others work, how evil societies can be, how evil people can be to gain power, and just to what extent they'll go to get what they want. And when you're comfortable in life, you can't believe that somebody else is not. And so we really don't understand. And now with the schools, what they're teaching is completely the opposite of what is true. Socialism is not a good thing. Communism is even worse. And socialism always leads to communism. It never ends at socialism.
How about the media's impression of the Sanders wing of the Democrat Party? They view it as a benevolent movement.
Well, they couldn't be more wrong. They could not, because absolute power corrupts absolutely, and so there is no stop. You don't stop in the middle. When you seek power, you seek it all, and it's just that it's fooled some of the people some of the time, but here they're trying to fool all the people all the time. It doesn't work because literally, no matter what, there's only so much of everything to go around. And those on top get it, and those on the bottom don't. And so people live in poverty. They live in squalor. My parents both worked in a bank. My mom was a bank inspector. Between the two of them, they didn't have enough to last the month, just for food. Okay? We had no indoor plumbing. They literally couldn't make the month. I mean, they couldn't buy a pair. If they bought a pair of shoes, they didn't have enough for something else. It's, and the government decided what was produced. If that month they produced shoes and shoes became available and you were lucky that you could find one in your size, great. And if not, you waited until they produced some more.